everyone. Thanks for joining today. So, over the next 20 to 40 minutes, we are going to be discussing a bit more on carbon reduction plans and, more importantly, how to make the entire process straightforward, affordable, and genuinely beneficial for your businesses. Whether you're completely new to CRPs or already have one and want to improve your approach, today's session will give you everything you need to move forward with it. So, a bit about myself. My name is Albi Isaac, and I have been working as a sustainability consultant here at Dasarna for the last over 2 years. I specialize in helping businesses measure and report on their carbon emissions and help them develop their net zero route maps. Also help with broader decarbonization and supporting them on every stage of their net zero journey. So today we are going to take you through everything you need to understand about carbon reduction plans or CRPs and why they matter for your businesses. We'll start by unpacking the procurement policy note or PPN 0621, the policy that's driving CRP requirements across the UK, which has been recently renamed to PPN 006. Then we'll look at what CRPs actually are, why they have become the gold standard for credible climate action, and also we will look at why they matter and if your business needs one. Critically, we'll also look at the real cost of inaction, both in terms of lost contracts, competitive disadvantage, and we'll also talk about the expertise problem many organizations face when trying to create this report for themselves. Then I will talk about how BringAbout, a web-based tool we had developed, solves these challenges, providing the tools and support you need wherever you are in your sustainability journey. And by the end of this session, you'll understand exactly what's required, why it matters, and how to move forward. So let's get started. At Decerna, we provide a variety of services across four key departments. First, we have the utility scale, which deals mainly with deploying renewable energy and grid infrastructure. Second is the field trials and smart home technology testing. I work in the net zero and the built environment department, where we provide energy and decarbonization support for businesses. Also, we have developed our own carbon accounting tool called BringAbout, which we will look at in more detail today. And then we have the life cycle assessment team, which supports sustainable manufacturing with LCA and relevant standards and certifications such as EPD and CBAM. So uh, let's start with the policy that created this entire landscape. In June of 2021, the UK government issued a procurement policy note 0621, commonly known as PPN 0621, uh, and it's currently known as PPN 006 after its rebrand in 2025. This wasn't a guidance or a suggestion. From September 30th of 2021, it became a mandatory requirement for any supplier bidding for central government contracts over £5 million per year. The government recognized that with hundreds of billions of pounds in annual public sector procurement spending, this policy could drive measurable climate action by making carbon reduction plans a prerequisite for doing business. The UK has also seen a significant reduction in carbon emissions over the last few decades. Now, let's look at how this policy has evolved and expanded since 2019. It all started back in 2019, where the UK government made a commitment to achieve net zero by 2050. It was the first major economy to do so, and it basically laid the foundation for everything that followed since then. In June of 2021, the procurement policy note was published and it came into effect in the September of 2021, requiring suppliers bidding on any new UK government contracts over £5 million per year to submit a carbon reduction plan. In April of 2024, the NHS extended the CRP requirements to all NHS procurements and to all its suppliers, regardless of the contract value, massively widening its scope. It was in February 2025 that was later rebranded to PPN 006, which is currently known as. Currently, the NHS suppliers are only required to report on Scope 1, Scope 2, and a small subset of Scope 3 categories. But from April of 2027, the NHS supply requirement will take a major step forward. All suppliers of NHS, regardless of size, sector, geography, will need to publish a CRP covering all Scope 1, Scope 2, and Scope 3 emissions globally, aligned with the NHS Net Zero Supplier Roadmap. This means that if you're a supplier for the NHS, your reporting boundary will need to expand significantly. Even if your NHS contracts are delivered by your UK operations, global emissions across your value chain will also need to be included. This slide shows the NHS Net Zero Supplier Roadmap, which sets out exactly what's coming and when. In April 2022, all NHS procurements had to include just a minimum of 10% net zero weighting, which was guided by the European Assessment for Medicines. This was the starting point, making sustainability a formal evaluation criterion. In April 2023, new contracts over £5 million per year required carbon reduction plans covering UK Scope 1, Scope 2, and a selected Scope 3 categories. This brought the NHS in line with wider government requirements. In April 2024, the CRP requirements extended to all NHS procurements and size no longer mattered. And just like I mentioned, in April 2027, all suppliers must publicly report their emissions or will have to publicly report their emissions and targets with CRP covering global Scope 1, Scope 2, and Scope 3. This is the big shift. Your entire value chain globally comes into scope. And even further down the line, in April 2028, suppliers will have to provide product level carbon footprinting, including scope and methodology set by the NHS regulators. This moves beyond organizational reporting to product specific data. Each milestone builds on the last. The roadmap is clear, the dates are set, and the requirements are getting more demanding. The question isn't whether this applies to you, it's whether you're ready when it does. And while this roadmap currently applies to just the NHS suppliers, the NHS is often a trendsetter for wider public sector procurement. As the largest single employer and procurer in the UK, the standards it sets typically influence other government departments and public bodies. And it might be just a matter of time before we start seeing similar requirements appear in other industries and sectors soon. So, what actually is a carbon reduction plan? Think of it as your roadmap to net zero. It's a specific, measurable, published commitment. A compliant CRP must include five key elements. First, your current carbon footprint. This means measuring your emissions across three scopes: Scope 1, Scope 2, and Scope 3. Currently, only five Scope 3 categories are mandated to be included in the CRP, namely upstream transportation and distribution, downstream transportation and distribution, waste generated in operations, business travel, and employee commute. Second is your baseline year emissions. This is your starting point. Typically, the earliest year you have reliable data for, or basically your first year of reporting, which can either be a calendar year or financial year as per the data availability and ease of data gathering. Third, reduction targets that align with net zero by 2050. These can be arbitrary. They need to show a credible pathway to eliminating or offsetting all your emissions by 2050. Both near-term and long-term targets would be required, with the near-term targets acting as milestones on the way to achieving the long-term target, which is basically the net zero target for the reporting company or business. Fourth, details of your planned reduction measures. This is where you document the specific actions you'll be taking in the coming years so that you can achieve both your near-term and long-term targets. It could be switching your LED lighting, improving insulation, electrifying your fleet, or whatever is relevant to your operations and can help you achieve those near-term and long-term targets you have chosen to go for. And fifth, a commitment to publish this report annually. A CRP isn't a once and done document. It's a report you need to update every year to show your progress and give you a better idea of where you are on your net zero journey. The key thing to understand is that a CRP is both a planning document and an accountability mechanism. It's your roadmap to net zero, but also a public declaration of where you are and where you're going, and that transparency is powerful. As I mentioned earlier, you have to report on Scope 1, Scope 2, and a subset of Scope 3 categories as a mandatory requirement. So, Scope 1 covers your direct emissions from your business or reporting company. It's the emissions that's from sources you own or control directly. It includes fuel consumed in your company, own vehicles, gas you use for heating in your buildings, or emissions from manufacturing processes you operate. Scope 2 covers indirect energy emissions, which are basically the emissions from the electricity, heating, or cooling you purchase and use. For example, the emissions generated at a power station to produce the electricity that runs your office or factories. And scope 3 is all the other indirect emissions, which is basically the emissions from your supply chain that you don't have any control over. From the CRP requirements, the mandatory categories of scope 3 that a business needs to report on are upstream and downstream transportation and distribution, waste generated in operations, business travel, and employee commute. So, upstream and downstream transportation and distribution emissions are those emissions from moving your goods from your suppliers to your businesses or and from your businesses to your customers. Waste generated in operation is the emissions from the disposal and treatment of waste produced by your business. And business travel emissions are those from any work related travel in vehicles not owned by your company. And employee commuting emissions are those from employees traveling between their home and their workplace. Now, before we move on to who needs a CRP, I want to spend a moment on why CRPs matter and have become so important. CRPs transform climate action from aspiration to accountability. So, first, measurement. You simply cannot manage what you don't measure. How many businesses say they are committed to sustainability but have never actually quantified their carbon footprint? A CRP forces this measurement, and once you measure, you understand, you see where your emissions actually come from, which is often surprising, and it basically gives you a starting point to start reducing your emissions and identify which areas to target to become less carbon intensive. Second, transparency. So once a CRP is published, it's on your website for everyone to see. Clients, investors, employees, competitors, and that transparency builds trust. When you publish numbers, targets, and specifications, stakeholders know you're serious. And third is accountability. Because you update annually, progress or lack of it becomes visible. You can't claim commitment to net zero without demonstrating progress. The annual update creates a forcing function that drives action rather than just good intentions. Fourth, credibility. Science-based targets aligned with net zero by 2050 show you understand the scale of the challenge and that you are taking it seriously. This isn't greenwashing, it's evidence-based commitment. The specific methodologies required by PPN 006 ensures consistency and comparability. And fifth is action. From what we have learned from working with several companies, documenting specific reduction measures actually means you implement them. There's something about writing down, for example, stating that you will try to upgrade to, for example, LED lightings, transforms it from a vague idea into a project with budgets and deadlines. So the next obvious question would be whether this actually applies to you and your business. So let's look at this decision tree. So the first question would be to ask, do you bid for a government contract? If it's yes, and those contracts are over £5 million per year, you need a CRP right now. That's a non-negotiable. And but even if you don't bid directly for government work, you can ask yourself, do you supply or are part of the value chain of a larger business that does so? Because here's what's happening. Large prime contractors who need CRPs are cascading that requirement down their supply chains. If they need to demonstrate carbon reduction, they need visibility of your emissions too, which means you likely need a CRP. Now, even if neither of those applies to you or your business today, the critical point is that that is not just a government anymore. Because, like I mentioned earlier, the NHS has already removed the threshold entirely from April of 2024 and they extended the CRP requirements to all new procurements regardless of value. So the real question isn't whether your business needs one, it's when will your business need it. And for most businesses supplying the public sector or large corporates, the answer is sooner than you think. If you're in construction, facilities management, IT services, professional services, logistics, or manufacturing, this will be something that will affect you in the coming years. Now, here's where why CRPs aren't just about ticking procurement box. The business that does this well will see genuine competitive advantages. First, enhance reputation and brand value. Customers, particularly younger demographics, increasingly choose suppliers based on environmental credentials. A credible CRP demonstrates you're serious about sustainability and not just greenwashing. Improved investor relations matter too. ESG criteria are now mainstream in investment decisions. Investors want to see that you are managing climate risk and positioning for the low carbon economy. Green finance access is expanding rapidly. Banks and lenders are offering preferential terms and lower interest rates for businesses with robust environmental strategies. Your CRP can literally help you reduce your cost of capital. Better staff recruitment and retention. Top talent, especially younger professionals, want to work for companies aligned with their values. A strong sustainability position makes you an employer of choice. Then there's future proofing your business against carbon taxation. The direction of travel is clear. Carbon will be priced. Companies measuring and reducing emissions now will face lower costs when carbon taxes inevitably tighten or come about. A better understanding of resource use and waste disposal leads directly to operational efficiencies and cost savings. You cannot manage what you do not measure. Improve data collection and management systems. Strengthen your entire business intelligence capability, not just carbon reporting. And resilience to climate related business risk. Understanding your carbon footprint means understanding your supply chain vulnerabilities, energy dependencies, and climate exposure. Let's talk about where this is heading because the regulatory landscape is tightening rapidly. Firstly, that 5 million threshold will most almost certainly come down. The government has made it clear they want to expand the scope. We can expect to see the threshold lowered and more sectors brought into scope over the next couple of years. It might not be in the next 2 or even 3 years, but it will eventually come about, especially if the UK has to achieve its net zero targets. Beyond procurement requirements, certain large companies face mandatory climate related financial disclosures based on TCFD aligned frameworks, which is the Task Force on Climate Related Financial Disclosures. In the UK, this applies to premium listed companies, large private companies, and LLPs, meaning specific thresholds. And here's what matters for smaller suppliers. These companies need Scope 3 emission data, which includes their supply chain emissions, to complete their own reporting. They'll be asking you for it if you're a significant part of their value chain. Various supply chain due diligence regulations are emerging, particularly in the UK and across Europe. Companies may be held responsible for sustainability impacts throughout their supply chains. That means they'll increasingly be asking you for your emissions data and reduction plans. The cascade effect we talked about earlier is about to accelerate dramatically as its regulatory requirements take hold. Carbon border adjustment mechanisms. Essentially, the tariffs on high carbon imports are being implemented now. The EU's carbon border adjustment mechanism, or CBAM, entered its transitional phase in October 2023 with obligations beginning in 2026. It currently applies to specific carbon intensive sectors, including cement, iron, steel, aluminium, fertilizers, and so on. This is changing the economics of international trade in these sectors and influencing where companies source from. The direction is clear. Environmental performance is becoming a core factor in business competitiveness and it's not just a nice to have add on. Here, the thing about getting ahead of this curve. Early movers gain genuine advantage. They learn the processes, build the capabilities, and position themselves as preferred suppliers for the long term. Those who wait and try to catch up find themselves at a disadvantage, facing compliance costs, struggling to meet evolving requirements, and missing opportunities while they're scrambling to comply. So, in case if you don't have a CRP when it's required, you'll automatically be excluded from applicable central government tenders. And that's just not a risk, that's a certainty for those contracts. You cannot bid. The revenue is gone before you even get started. Loss of competitive positioning. While you're sitting in this out, your competitors are building capabilities, winning contracts, and establishing themselves as preferred suppliers. Supply chain vulnerability. Your major clients are setting their own carbon targets. They need visibility of your emissions. If you can't provide that data, you become a liability in their supply chain and missing opportunities across a significant portion of the procurement market. We're talking about substantial public sector procurement spend flowing through these requirements, plus the cascade effect into private sector requirements. Every contract you cannot bid for is revenue walking out the door. Now, let's talk about the iceberg effect. Because what you see on the surface is only part of the cost. The visible cost, which is the lost tender opportunities or the framework exclusions we've just covered, those are the most immediate and obvious. But below the waterline, the hidden costs are where the real damage can accumulate. Potentially higher borrowing costs. Banks are increasingly favoring environmental performance into lending decisions for certain sectors and loan types. Companies with poor environmental data may face higher interest rates. Your cost of capital could go up. Potentially increased insurance premiums. Insurers have started pricing climate risk into their products, particularly for physical assets and in sectors where high climate exposure. Better environmental management mean better premiums. Ignore it and you could have to pay more. Staff retention challenges. Like I mentioned earlier, many talented employees, especially younger workers, consider environmental commitment when choosing employers. If you cannot demonstrate genuine action, you may be at a disadvantage in the talent market. Reputational risk. In an era of transparency, having no credible environmental strategy sends a signal and not a good one. And perhaps, most significantly, playing catch up later is far more expensive than acting now. When you don't need to do something quickly because you missed a deadline or lost a client, you pay premium prices and would have to make rushed decisions under pressure, which might cause further problems in the future. Now, if creating a CRP were straightforward, everyone would have done it already. So let's be honest about the challenges. Most businesses lack carbon accounting expertise. This is a specialist field. If you've never done it before, it feels overwhelming. Where do you even start? What frameworks do you use? How do you structure your report? It's not intuitive. Some of the issues related to that are constantly evolving reporting standards. The methodologies change, emission factors are updated, and guidance gets refined. What was compliant last year might not be this year. You're aiming at a moving target. Second, different methodologies and emission factors. Which database do you use? Which calculation approach do you take? The choices matter, and getting them wrong undermines credibility. Third, the risk of non compliance through errors. Get your Scope 3 calculations wrong, miss a material emission source, and your CRP doesn't meet requirements. You spend the time and money but still couldn't bid for contracts. The whole exercise becomes worthless. Fourth one, data collection is overwhelming. Gathering data from across all your operations, from suppliers, from utility bills, from travel records, it's resource intensive and often fragmented across different departments and systems. Scope 3 emissions are complex. These are your indirect emissions from your value chain, upstream and downstream. They're often the largest portion of your footprint, but also the hardest to measure because you're relying on third party data. And finally, keeping it current and updated. A CRP isn't a one time document. You need to update it regularly, track progress against targets, and demonstrate continuous improvement. That requires ongoing resource commitment. So here's what typically happens when a company decides to create a CRP the traditional way, doing it entirely in-house with spreadsheets. First, someone needs to figure out where to even start, which frameworks apply, which emission factors should they use, what scope boundaries are appropriate, and without expertise, this research phase alone can take weeks. Then begins the manual data collection phase. This takes weeks of staff time across multiple departments, gathering all the necessary information. Energy bills, fuel receipts, travel records, supply chain information. It's resource intensive and disruptive to normal operations. Next comes the spreadsheet construction phase, building calculation templates, finding and inputting right emission factors, creating formulas, linking data across multiple sheets. This is where errors are commonly creep in, and one misplaced decimal point or wrong unit conversion and your entire carbon footprint calculation is compromised. Then the analysis and calculation phase. Typically, several weeks to a few months while someone processes all the data, runs calculation, checks for errors, develops targets, and you're essentially stuck in spreadsheets, unable to move forward efficiently. Finally, report writing and review. Compiling everything you've done into a document that meets the PPN 006 template requirements, ensuring all the necessary commitments are included, making it presentable and credible. The total timeline would be more than a couple of months. And from when you decide to do this until you have a completed CRP, and it could even be longer for larger businesses. So if you're trying to bid for a contract and realize you need a CRP, that delay could mean missing the opportunity entirely. But here's where it gets more problematic. Keeping it updated. Next year, you need to update it. That means going back through the entire process again, collecting data, updating spreadsheets, recalculating everything, checking for errors, and revising the report. And it just continues year after year after year. Over time, these spreadsheets become more complex, harder to maintain, and more prone to errors. Different people can make changes, formulas break, emission factors become outdated, and suddenly you're not sure if your data is even reliable anymore. And here's the critical problem, it's incredibly resource and time intensive and error prone. Every update requires significant staff time, and calculations risk human error. And when a client asks for specific emissions data, someone has to dig through spreadsheets to find it. When requirements change, you're rebuilding formulas from scratch again. And for especially businesses and especially as SMEs, this model is just, not sustainable at all. The resource burden is too high, the timelines are too high, and the risk of errors undermines the credibility of the entire carbon reduction plan. And that's where Bring About could potentially help you to make it a bit more easier and manageable. What if creating and maintaining a professional carbon reduction plan was as simple as using any other business software? And what if it took just hours instead of months? And that's why Bring About could help you. Bring About is our web-based carbon accounting platform, and it's been designed specifically to solve all the challenges we just talked about. And instead of wrestling with spreadsheets for months, you get a uh, structured guided system that can help with everything. The platform has comprehensive emission factor databases built right in based on the GHG protocol and the UK government conversion factors. We update these annually so you're always working with the current data. No more hunting for the right factors or worrying if they're outdated. You can input your activity data, energy consumption, travel, waste, and Bring About automatically applies the correct emission factors and performs the calculations. So what this means is that timeline can go from months to weeks, and updates that used to take several weeks or months can just take hours. And you can build internal capability rather than just staying dependent on spreadsheets that only one person or a small team could understand. Bring About handles the data processing and calculations efficiently and accurately, freeing up time to focus on what really matters, developing credible reduction strategies and positioning your business competitively. What if creating and maintaining a professional CRP was as simple as using any other software? So, so what? So, like I said, BringAbout is a web-based carbon footprinting tool. It's entirely web-based. You don't have to install any software, no version control issues, and it can be accessed from anywhere. You can just log in and you can start. The platform has comprehensive emission factor databases built right in based on the UK conversion factors and which are updated annually. So you can just input your activity data and BringAbout automatically applies the correct factors and performs all the calculations. It's specifically designed around the PPN template requirements. The platform ensures you're capturing what procurement requires, structuring your data correctly, and producing reports that meet the mandatory criteria. Once your data is in, BringAbout can generate your carbon reduction plans and also other reports automatically. And it produces professional compliant reports with just a few clicks. BringAbout also integrates directly with Sage Accounting and also accepts bulk CSV uploads. This means that you can automate much of your data entry rather than manually entering or inputting data every time. You can just connect your accounting system or your Sage accounting system, and the relevant spend based data flows directly into your carbon calculations. You can also export your data from your current accounting system and upload it in bulk as a CSV. This can reduce the time and effort taken drastically. The platform also allows you to set science-based reduction targets, which is both the near-term and the long-term targets. So once you've set those targets, BringAbout tracks your progress against them year on year, so you can see if you're on track or if adjustments are needed. The platform can also work with whatever data you have. Got detailed consumption data, you can use our activity-based calculations. Or if you just have spend-based data, you can use we have spend-based emission factors as well. Uh, Sorry about that. It was just a small technical difficulty. I'll just share my screen again. So yes, like I was saying, BringAbout just doesn't calculate all the minimum which is required for CRPs. It can handle Scope 1, Scope 2, and all the 15 Scope 3 categories. This means that you're getting a comprehensive carbon footprint and not just the bare minimum for procurement compliance. You're building a complete picture of your environmental impact, and the platform can generate multiple report types. The PPN06 compliant reduction plan, the SECR reports for streamlined energy and carbon reporting, and BringAbout's own detailed carbon emissions report. Now, let's walk you through how exactly BringAbout works. First, you just have to set up your account. You can define your company details, choose what to include in your reporting boundary, select your baseline year, and once these things are done, you don't have to do it again. Next, you can select or add your reporting year. If this is your first year of reporting, you can just choose a reporting period and you're all set to start adding data. If you have already calculated your base year externally or from any other emission calculator, you can select the year and add the emissions directly. You can also input data for your baseline year to establish your starting point, and then add subsequent years as you go. This structure allows you to track emissions over time and demonstrate year-on-year progress. Next, you can add data. You can add your activity data like electricity consumption, gas usage, business travel, waste purchase goods, whatever's relevant to your operations. You can manually enter data, upload it in bulk using CSV files, or integrate directly with your accounting systems like Sage. Once your data is in, BringAbout automatically calculates your emissions using the correct emission factors, and you can see your total emissions broken down by scope and source. Next, you can set targets, which like I mentioned, is the near-term and long-term targets as per the Science-Based Targets Initiative. And then finally, you can generate your reports. It generates a professional, fully formatted, compliant documents ready to sign and publish on your website. And next year, when you need to update your report, you can just select the new reporting year, update your activity data, and the platform recalculates everything automatically. You can track progress against targets, demonstrate continuous improvements, and generate your updated report. We also have included several additional resources designed to make the entire carbon accounting process easier and more comprehensive. First, we also provide some data logging tools to help businesses collect and summarize data, especially when there are large inventories or complex data sources. These are essentially ready to use templates that you can distribute to employees or departments to gather the information you need. For example, if you need to collect employee commuting data, we have templates employees can fill in with their typical commuting distance, mode of transport. These templates are designed to make data collection systematic and consistent. We also have a FAQ section where we maintain a comprehensive section answering all the common questions that businesses encounter while creating CRPs and calculating their emissions. We also have a knowledge folder with fact sheets and videos on various energy efficient technologies that can be implemented to reduce emissions. It can cover things like LED lighting retrofits, building insulation improvements, heat pump installations, solar PV systems, EV fleet transitions, and more. Each fact sheet provides an overview of the technology, typical carbon savings, implementations considerations, and cost ranges. These additional tools address the practical challenges businesses face beyond just calculations. Data collection, understanding terminologies, methodologies, along with getting an idea of what reduction measures are actually viable to go ahead with. BringAbout is more like a complete ecosystem of tools and resources that can help you through all your entire process from data gathering, carbon accounting to developing reduction strategies. And if you want to discuss your specific situation, your carbon reporting challenges, or even understand how BringAbout could potentially work for your business, you can get in touch. You can also visit our website to explore the platform and also our different pricing options.